Brighter Media Group original.
What is up, my friends? Hey, it's John. Welcome, and welcome back to the Versed Podcast. If you're new, so glad you are here. Thank you for joining me in this daily pursuit to become more perceptive to what the Bible says. Today, we're going to be reading from the book of Hosea, chapter 1, verses 8 and 9. Maybe you've heard people speak about God, or specifically the Old Testament God, as a cosmic abuser, a vengeful, wrathful murderer. Maybe you even believe that yourself. I do have empathy for that point of view. I really do, because at first glance, it may appear that way, especially if we do what we often do, and is easy to do, is filter the Bible through our own lens to insert ourselves into the narrative, instead of reading the Bible fully and contextually. It's only when I begin to do that, and when I did do that, that my eyes were opened, and then my heart began exploding with this truth, that God is just and righteous. But when we fail to measure up, to meet expectations, He fulfills the requirements for us. God is so merciful, and it's so clear throughout the pages of the New Testament. And it's really at the core what the book of Hosea is all about, and that's what we're diving into today. God didn't ask Hosea to marry an unfaithful wife just for kicks. Hosea's story is intentional and meant to help God's people understand how far His love goes, a love that makes no sense to human logic. If you're unfamiliar with the story of Hosea, this is the part of the podcast where we set the historical and biblical context to what we are reading to understand the Bible as it was intended to be understood. We know almost nothing about Hosea except for what is actually found within the book itself that actually bears his name. Hosea is one of the minor prophets in the Old Testament. At the start of his ministry, the northern kingdom of Israel was experiencing prosperity that was surpassed only under the reigns of King David and Solomon. Yet, things changed dramatically after Jeroboam II died. Over the next 20 years, there was upheaval in Samaria, Israel's capital. 4 of the 6 kings who followed Jeroboam II were assassinated. Some of these kings made deals with the more powerful Assyrian Empire in order to secure their own positions, which effectively turned Israel into a country that was economically, politically, and militarily dependent on Assyria. When Israel eventually revolted, Assyria invaded and took the Israelites into exile, and this was in 722 BC. So that's some historical context, but biblically, what was God's perspective is that idolatry was the fundamental problem here. So the Lord sent Hosea to Israel to both warn the people against foreign alliances and, more importantly, to denounce the ethical violations and their idol worship. Hosea preached doom and gloom, really, and he warned Israel that God would reject them and hand them over to Assyria. Nevertheless, Hosea also had words of hope for those that remained in Israel. Destruction would come, but there would be an incredible restoration on the other side of exile. See, Hosea is different than the other prophets in that he chronicles his prophecies against the backdrop of his own personal life. God called Hosea, like I mentioned, to marry a woman named Gomer who would continuously break her marriage covenant with her husband. But Hosea still obeyed. And in doing so, Hosea acts out the relationship between God and his people, Israel, us as well, who had committed this spiritual adultery by leaving her husband God for lovers in the form of false gods. Yet despite Israel's cheating ways, the Lord did not give up on his wife. God sent Hosea to woo Israel back to him and to warn the community that adultery would lead only to its ruin. And so in chapter 1, which we read from today, we dive into where God is telling Hosea the specific symbolic names for his children with Gomer. They were specific, they were symbolic, they were purposeful. Today's verse focuses on the third child. So let's be prepared to read Hosea chapter 1, verses 8 and 9. After Gomer had weaned Lo-ruhamah, she again became pregnant and gave birth to a second son. And the Lord said, "Name him Lo-ami, not my people, for Israel is not my people, and I am not their God." Hopefully I got those pronunciations right, but if not, I'm sure someone will correct me. But that's not the point. So a God who promised steadfast love, time after time after time, says, "You are not my people, and I am not your God." The same God who delivered them out of slavery from Egypt, made a covenant with them, said this. And that had to be painful to hear, right? Like, wait, what? How could God just pull the rug out like that? But it was Israel, God's chosen, who took God's love for granted and went out to find their own happiness from other gods. Israel was the one seeking lesser loves and rejecting their relationship with the one who continued to save them time and time and time again. Do we not do the same thing with God today? There's nothing new here. There's nothing new under the sun. Nothing changes in history. It just doesn't. So forgive me if when people speak about God being this horrible being, this cosmic abuser, just pulling the puppet strings, that it irks me to my core. Because repeated abandonment, then apologizing, then promising to be better, then breaking the promise, and doing that cycle over and over again, that sounds more like we're the ones doing the abusing. We spit in his face, we mock him, we dishonor him, and then beg for him to save us again. If you were in a relationship with someone like that, you'd run for the hills, and I tell you to do the same thing. But here's the deal. God, with his infinite kindness and power and mercy, stands up to our attempts to break our covenant with him. He loves you so much and so well that he takes on the repercussions of what breaking a covenant means. He sent his son Jesus to stand in the gap for you because he loves you. And that just blows my mind. You see, when we know the Bible, when we become more perceptive to it, which is the goal of this podcast, only then can we truly understand something like this, that the God of the Old Testament has just as much love as the God of the New Testament. And when we understand it in its fullness, it is clear to see that beauty. You can't not see it. My friends, we are saved according to his great mercy. God fulfills the terms of his own wrath. I'm going to need a minute after that. So take yours too, to reflect, to meditate, to pray, to connect with God, and let that truth sink in. And we'll come back on the other side. Thank you so much for listening to the Versed podcast today. I hope it is bringing you the encouragement that you need and the guts and the fortitude to face whatever trials are being thrown your way right now. I know it's doing that for me. So thank you for listening and being a part of this Versed family. If you want to check out the the resources that I use to do my own Bible study, to put these podcasts together, if you want to go further and do your own study, you can do that. Those are linked in the episode notes. If you would love to contact and connect with me on social media, that's linked in the episode notes as well. If you wouldn't mind, if you have not done this yet, leave a written review specifically in Apple Podcasts. That helps more people discover the podcast through Apple's algorithm, and it also helps people determine if this is something worth listening to. So if you wouldn't mind leaving a written review and a rating in Apple Podcast, I would love that so much. Thanks for listening today. Hope to talk to you soon. Make sure you make hope louder today. We'll talk tomorrow.